to find and are looking for that one, but that's
But
not the
they
disappeared
didn't
one.
mark the coordinates of
They did, but it's deeper than here.
It's deeper and also in the middle of the ocean.
Correct, yeah.
We also had the Brazilian clipper.
Brazilian clipper was the one that was made into the houseboat, right?
Oh, I don't know.
I think it was.
Yeah, one of them was purchased in, I think, Miami and made into a houseboat.
I think that was the Brazilian clipper.
You were
Yeah, that's
shooting
right.
it for
Brazilian,
30
that's
minutes
the wing?
That's
with
right.
the 20mm cannon.
Yes. Yeah, the Honolulu clipper. In one of these incidences, they even invited the passengers that had just gotten off the aircraft and onto the Navy vessel. They invited them to take turns at the gun, shooting this poor plane, which must have been kind of surreal.
It's a consolation prize if
I
your plane
suppose.
goes down.
Yeah.
It was only the wealthy that could afford to fly.
So DB Cooper was 1971, and it was a
71.
727, so it's close.
Between Portland and Seattle.
Yeah.
That's cool.
The FBI is pretty sure he did not survive that jump, but they kept the investigation active till 2016.
And so were all of the clippers named based on locations they flew to?
No, I don't think that that's the case, but I don't have a better explanation right now. I think that they're just named after locations that maybe Pan Am flew to,
Okay.
but it might not have been that necessarily that Clippers one.
Well, sometimes the clippers' names were changed. So they
That's
started
right,
out
too.
as survey ships. So our
Yeah.
Samoan clipper was actually, I think it was Pan Am Clipper 2.
And it got renamed
And then it was
in
renamed
March of
Samoan
1937?
Clipper when it picked up this route.
Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
yeah.
So here's a question. So if a ship is going to be used to help create an artificial reef, what type of preparations do they
Ooh.
need to do for that?
Ton of
That's a good
stuff.
question.
Yeah. Oh, you can answer that one, Megan.
Oh no, no, I actually can't. All I would say would be like get stuff off of it, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, especially
Hopefully.
nowadays. Like, I'm sure, 20 years ago is a different story, but now with all, like, older ships, asbestos needs to be removed, PCBs, certain paints need to be, like, chipped off if it's got lead in it. Like, there's a whole bunch of regulations now. So to prep the Oriskany, for instance, that huge aircraft carrier was a 2.5 or maybe it was 3 years of prepping just to do all that stripping of everything that could be, harmful to the environment. And it's a big undertaking, but I mean, once it's sunk and out there, it's a great, fish habitat. And I remember the day it sunk actually at my high school graduation that I left the same day to see it sink, and they just let off a bunch of charges in a controlled way and kind of.
That's what's going to be my next question. So they actually like blow stuff up in it?
Yeah, they naval architects kind of get on it and they figure all the different, hatches and how they want to flood it.
That's cool.
And then they'll set up charges and then blow certain areas to flood it. And then hopefully, hoping for the best, it sinks upright. Now luckily this one did. Sometimes it doesn't always go that way. And then sometimes even if it's in different, they might have actually even done this to the Oriskany, but they'll put like a 4-point anchor system on it to keep it in kind of place while it sinks.
Oh, that's cool.
And I'm not sure if they did that. Maybe they did for the Oriskany, but yeah, so it's kind of a pretty cool operation to see when it sinks. Explosions. And then the Navy divers were, right after it sunk, they went to dive and just inspect it, and they gave the thumbs up, like, yeah, it sank really good. So that was cool. But sometimes different methods will be used to sink for artificial reefs. Like, for instance, they'll already pre-cut hatches and like even like the side shell of it, and then they'll put like temporary patches on, and then they'll put it in place where they want to sink it, and then remove the patches, and then like let it sink that way in a controlled way, or even use airbags to like float it out. And then so there's a few different methods depending on many different.
But of course, explosions are
The
the
best.
coolest ones. Yeah, yeah.
And usually for the heavy duty, the bigger ships. stuff.
It's been really fascinating hearing about intentional flooding and sinking of ships, and also aircraft, because
They
often
do some aircraft as well.
yeah, because often you think of that as an accident, but just not only for like navigation, but also for, as Summer mentioned, artificial reefs. That's really interesting.
I know there's a DC-3 off the coast of Bermuda, which is a really recognizable, iconic vintage aircraft, and so it's a real treat to be able to dive on something like that.
I think that when we dove on it was at the Independence a few years back, there was some Hellcats
Yes.
strapped to the deck.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, and there was one in the hangar as
Yeah.
well. Yes,
That's awesome.
I was on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's awesome. Artificial reefs, they provide a huge fish habitat. Fish
Yeah.
flock to it, and then obviously, again, cities really want that. It attracts a huge diver crowd. Divers, you know, it's a pretty big group of people, and they get pretty hardcore about it and always want to see the next newest dive. And people travel a lot to do tech diving and some recreational deep diving. So it's pretty good for cities to get that kind of tourism in.
Sometimes they don't tell you what they're doing. I mean, a few years back, it was in the Gulf of Mexico, perhaps. I actually don't remember where it was, but we dove on a wreck that we found in the sonar. It was a target. Either we found it or someone else had found it, and we mapped over it. Anyway, we're diving on it, and it was a Fife-class destroyer. The Peterson, maybe, was the name of it? I can't remember, but it was an intentionally sunk naval vessel, but there was no record of it. So it's kind of like, well, they're just using it as target practice or something like that offshore. There was no...
What kind of approvals do you have to go through to make sure it's not a navigational hazard?
There's a lot of, it depends on, you know, where it is. If it's near shore, there's a lot of Coast Guard and Army Corps of Engineer talks that go on. Usually they're really excited to do that stuff, and sometimes the Coast Guard's even the one funding it, or the Army Corps. But yeah, I'm not actually sure like specifically, but I just think it depends on who's the governing entity. If it is the Army Corps, because I think they do more inshore stuff, and the Coast Guard's more offshore.
Depth matters too sometimes.
Yeah,
if
that would
if
be
it's
a
deep
thing.
enough, then
And then we do also like some operations will be scuttling stuff. So if we do a big wreck removal and it's more cost effective to, instead of, you know, bringing the whole ship up or even cutting it up, the insurance company will give the go ahead to, you know, salvage the big thing all in one piece and take it out to scuttle it, basically sink it offshore for, again, an artificial reef. And so I was a part of a project where we did that for a big oil jacket rig in India. Fell down, so we used these big chain pullers and divers to basically go down, rig it, and then lifted it under a barge and then scuttled it out of the oil field area.
Wow.
And that was a big project. Yeah.
what'd you do to lift it?
So we have these massive chain pullers, or basically these big hydraulic rams with 3-inch chain, like just massive machines. And the naval architects, you know, months before will lay out the design and how, you know, where the stresses are going to be, where the strength needs to be for that. Basically put chain overboard, divers will go rig piece by piece. So I think we had 13 or 14 on that project. So I mean, it was a 200-ton jacket. It was a massive structure, and the size of the pilings on them were like, you know, 6 feet around. So basically they would rig them, and then slowly, once they were all rigged, and then we would slowly bring them all up and get it out of like the suction of the mud or whatever. And then once it's off the bottom, X meters, then we would tow it out. So basically still hanging underneath the barge, and then tow it out to the place we wanted to sink it. And then we just use these big just cutters, and we're in its place, and we just rigged it to a solenoid actually, which is cool. So we had these solenoids for another part, but then we could just basically hit a switch and they would all cut at once, and
Cut
then
the
we
chain?
just, yeah, it was pretty, it was cool.
Does the Coast Guard
That's so
keep track
cool.
of where all these things are
This
located?
was, I'm sure in the U.S., but this was in India,
Oh,
so
wow.
in the
Oh,
oil
okay.
field, yeah. And I did another Indian project that was also really cool. So the Indian Navy, some accident happened. They were getting ready to do torpedo exercises offshore, and something happened, explosion, torpedo went off, and the submarine sunk at their dock. So we got contracted to basically get it out, but it was just like, first of all, there's a torpedo missing, so we had to find that, and then it was stuck in this like 7 meters of like sticky suction mud. So the idea was we used divers to jet underneath it and then ran messenger lines under it. Okay, sorry. So we brought a barge in over the sub. Then we ran messenger lines underneath at different sections of the sub, brought them up, and then again those chain pullers were on the barge, and then so we could slowly lift it section by section. And then once we had it off the sea floor, we sunk another barge underneath it. And then we had these cradles made that were on the sunken barge. So we lifted that, we refloated that barge so the sub sat in it, and then towed it into the dry dock where they could do investigations. So that was a really cool project as well.
So it had a barge on either side of it?
So yeah, exactly. So basically there's a barge and the sub in between, another barge, and then we rigged it between, and then we lifted it, and then we sunk another barge underneath it with the cradles, and then refloated it. So it was just, what's cool about barges is they're compartmentalized, and you can sink them and then refloat them, and then had that on the cradles in the barge, and then towed it back to the dry dock. It was a big diesel electric Russian sub that the Indians bought for their Navy. So, yeah, it was not tiny.
So it's like a big hot dog.
Yeah. Yes. Heavy, big hot dog. Yeah, that was a couple years ago.
So continue to send in those questions that you have for us.
And Summer, you were working on that job as an ROV pilot?
So at that time I was so the visibility was pretty terrible for the divers, so I was working as kind of a survey technician. We used a blue view sonar when the divers were inside the sub to be able to just see around and look at the compartments and assess what, damage had been done, and it had caught fire, so there had been a lot of damage. It was melted, it was bad. Yeah. So just using that, and then I'd be up topside with this thing, like a monocle. So I had the design, like the drawings for the ship or the sub, and then the divers could see my computer screen with the drawings and stuff. So it was pretty cool, and I could just like tell them where to go and navigate through the sub, and then
can we get a snap zoom on
I was
that?
just doing technician stuff on that. No ROVs involved.
Rock.
Thanks, Ed.
Gotcha.
But for the jacket removal in the oil field, we did use smaller ROVs. We used a CI Falcon, and it's like just an eyeball ROV, and because it was so deep, we could use that as a great tool instead of using divers, because we only had X amount of divers.
Right.
And they'd have to go in a chamber, and we didn't want to lose divers over, because at the depths they're going to, they only had 10, 18 maybe max minutes. The current wasn't bad to do one thing, right? Rig something or observe something. So instead of using divers, we would try to throw the ROV in to look at the length of the chain above and say, okay, come down another meter instead of expending.
What kind of positioning do you use on a Falcon? Do you have a USBL, or is it just kind of?
No, I mean that we just didn't. We could put one on, and it would be awesome, and I would love for that. But we did not have a USBL at that point. We did actually have.
I guess at that point, if you're over the wreck.
Yeah, exactly. We did a Fugger out there, and they tried to put one on, but it was just the weight, and it just. Yeah. But it was pretty poor visibility as well. But it was covered in fishing nets, so that was a good hazard for the ROV. We got stuck a few times. Got it cut out, but it was a good tool.
Is that a rock to our left on side scan?
Its highlight is sort of moving
so
diagonal.
Rock, rock.
Rock, rock.
Rock, rock.
One interesting thing we saw in the sonar earlier, and I meant to point it out, but we were having a different conversation, was there was one of those ridge features that we've been seeing. But if you looked at it, it kind of looked like right angles, and that was associated with the heave. And the speed. I was gonna make a point of noting that the smear made it look vertical, and the heave made it look horizontal. And then so what would be a natural looking arch or curve of some kind, or even a line, looked like a edges, you know, like stepwise.
Yeah.
That's why I'm super excited when we get this thing in post-processing. It's hopefully clean some of that a little bit.
And when was that we passed that?
What was that?
Do you want me to write down a note about it?
Just a note. Just wanted to point out the some of the limitations right now.
Oh, okay.
It's about 1:50 p.m. American Samoa time, and just to kind of recap what we're doing right now for those of you watching from all over the world, including we have some viewers from US, UK, Canada, France, Spain. Thanks for tuning in. We are conducting a dive that's a bit different than what you might expect to see if you are a regular watcher on Nautilus Live, and we are actually not using Hercules right now. We're using just Argus. That's why you are used to, you can see the kind of heave up and down of the ship through Argus's camera, and that is in the nadir, so it's actually right underneath Argus and in the area that is not being scanned by side scan sonar. We're about 15 meters off the bottom, about 3,100, 3,200 meters deep right now, and we are conducting the search for the Samoan Clipper. We have about a 2 square mile search area that we are going through. We've a couple passes away from finishing the southern half of our search area, and we're identifying any dive targets that we might see that might be interesting to go back and look at later, especially after post-processing of the sonar images. And we're creating this side scan sonar map that you can see if you're looking at the quad view in channel 1. You'll see channel 2, Argus as Argus's camera, which again is directly beneath Argus, and in channel 3 you'll see kind of our path and the lines that we've been making back and forth across the search area. Keep sending in those questions and we'll be more than happy to answer them as we continue on. If we can explain anything that you're seeing in either of those channels, or anything you might be wondering about what we're doing, how we're doing it, or our plans. I don't have any tentative time if you're itching to see Hercules in the water. We don't have any definitive plans on when that will happen because we need to finish our grid pattern first. We're only traveling about a knot or so across this search area, so we're not going to be able to complete our search area within the next hour or two. Obviously, it's still going to take us a decent bit of time. But thanks for joining us. So Lonnie, if you had to take a guess, how much time total do you think you've spent in the archives throughout your career searching for wrecks and information?
You know, I can't even hazard a guess. I mean, it's more of a hobby and something I choose to do. So it's not as though I'm counting all the hours up, but I don't know, a few hundred I would guess.
Do they all know you by name there now? Say, Lonnie's back. She's going to find something.
Uh-oh, here she comes. She's going to ask for something we don't have. We're going to send her to a different floor. Actually, I had a wonderful contact list going because, as I mentioned earlier, when you're doing the research, the papers turn eventually to people. because then you have contacts in each organization that are helping you find things. And they have everybody has a network, a professional network, so you need to get out of the papers to the people before you finish the job. And then the project starts to live. Because you have other people involved, and you have their energies and their perspectives and their own archives and their own contacts, and somebody heard this and somebody knows that. And so actually of the hours that I logged, that's only a tiny percentage of the time it actually took, because when you're doing a project for someone, you spend all day both in traffic and at the research institution, and then you spend almost all night collating it and organizing it into different subject matter and files, and then sending it to the customer. So when they wake up in the morning, they've got it, and then you're back in the car and going to the archives or wherever you're going, Navy Yard, Smithsonian, Air and Space, wherever you're headed. And then do the same thing at night. It's very concentrated time, especially when there's a deadline. So I couldn't even begin to count the hours. But obviously I enjoyed it because I always say yes when the next project comes up.
So when you're doing this, and let's say you find some piece of information or eyewitness account or name that goes along with it, do you ever have to maybe track down that person if they're still around? Do you ever try to, or have to do any like follow-up interviews that you try and conduct?
Well, that did happen with Sikorsky for this project, in that we would have telephone meetings to try to find things. But for most of the projects, the people are long gone. So you can't really find them anymore.
Yeah. We have a question coming in about the sediment. Not that we've pulled up any, but everything kind of has a blue haze. Is it maybe gray or beige if we were to pull up any? Anybody have a guess?
I would believe beige, based on like sediment that we've seen on other dives.
I'm just thinking what the bottom of the camera looked like the other day. Brown, muddy.
Yeah, I'd imagine you're right. The just a browny beige. It's just like, like they were saying, it's a bit of a blue haze. And we're actually, I mentioned this the other day, but we're actually, if you're familiar with our operations, flying Argus a bit even closer to the seafloor than we normally would at times. It's just that we don't have we don't have Hercules down for both its lights or just the context of scale or anything like that.
Are we flying close enough to kick up sediment?
No, I haven't seen any.
No, that'd be not ideal.
Yeah, it's probably closer to 5 meters.
That will be known as a mic.
Yeah. I think that's closer to 5 meters. You'll start to see a little bit of, with the heave, you'll see the landing explosion there. With the
We're
sediment.
heaving about 3 meters at last time I checked it.
Yeah, that sounds accurate.
Yeah.
For the occasional scary one.
So for those of you asking about the image you're seeing on satellite, or excuse me, the third feed, you can see that black line, and that is that kind of snakes back and forth across the screen, and that's where the ship is continuing to move. Those green dotted lines that you can faintly see are those transect lines that we've been trying to move and cover from spot to spot. And the red arrow is the path that we are continuing to follow. You can see the ship right there, and then behind it, right in the front, that square rhombus shape right there that has the blue line trailing it, that's currently where Argus is, following behind us. And we had a great explanation earlier about the location and why that blue line is kind of all over the place, and it essentially just amounts to how it's locating itself and the interference that goes along with it. Those R1055432 that you see are the names for each one of those transect lines. So we're getting ready to go down to the third one. We're on the fourth one right now. And
How do you feel about this target?
I don't like this one,
Yeah.
but if you want me to, I will definitely map it.
Let's wait. It's still ongoing.
Yeah. I think that we've seen something that looks almost exactly like that.
And just to jump in for our audience really quick, the reason why we see so much blue in our camera screen is because water reflects blue light, or it scatters it. And so that causes blue light to become very visible and be reflected back at the camera, even though we're using white lights. Other wavelengths of light, like orange and red, get absorbed really quickly. And that's often why we see a lot of deep sea organisms, like sometimes the sea cucumbers you see drifting into view. They're sort of this pink purplish. It helps to disguise them. They're less visible in water because there's no red or orange light to bounce off of them and make them visible to predators. We've also had a couple, like shrimp, just glance into view very quickly, and those have also been sort of orange in color.
That was a great description of why we see blue.
Yes.
Good
Well
job,
done.
Peyton.
Thank you. Yeah, especially in
White shrimp are red.
Especially in the Pacific Northwest, there's these like orange cup corals, a lot of sponges. Anemones all tend to be really bright colors, all because of that like camouflaging effect caused by how water interacts with light. And it's just super fat. I used to volunteer / still do volunteer at the Seattle Aquarium, and I just love sharing that fact with visitors because it explains why so many things are such bright colors.
So Dr. Megan, here's a question for you. If the Simone Clipper was, let's say, intact, and as it moved its way towards the bottom of the seafloor, if it did kind of maybe, we'll say, slide or skid slightly on the seafloor, would you anticipate some of those marks to still potentially be there on the seafloor after this time, or would it have probably filled itself in?
It all depends on the current here. In my experience, when we look at deep water aircraft wrecks, there's a B-29 that we were looking at off the coast of Tinian, and the current was very high there, and it had actually scoured itself pits in front of all of the engines, and then when the current went up over the wing section, it started eating away behind the wing section, and there was a massive depression behind it. So anything that would have happened in the actual settling event would have been long gone. So I know that for some ships, we still do see the initial settling event, and it would have had a depression, and then the subsequent pushing of sediment out and outward from it. But a ship is a massive object, and it's got a lot of weight going down, so we don't see that same effect in aircraft usually.
There's also just current over time. If it's moving the sediment around it, it may look like a moat that was caused by the depression. But it may just be that that's how the ripples are forming around it.
Yeah, and that's what was going on that B-29.
Yeah.
So it's something where we would have to well, we'd have to, of course, find it first and then just see what was going on and make our educated guesses as to what was causing that afterwards.
Yeah.
Keep those questions coming in. Lonnie, we have a question coming in for you about the biggest wreck or crash you may have ever discovered.
The biggest wreck or crash?
Yes.
For me, and because well, actually, not
I
discovered.
think we'll go physical, maybe size.
Physical, maybe size. I was on board the team, on board. I was a part of the team that first looked at the USS Independence because there were aircraft on there. And that, I think, is in terms of size. But I will say that I can highlight here the wreck that I was investigating the last time I was on USS Macon, or sorry, excuse me, EB Nautilus, which was the USS Macon site, which was an airship site. So in the 30s, the US government had dirigible airships that we modeled off the Zeppelins and made them into flying aircraft carriers. So the airship itself actually carried 4 biplanes in it at a time in its interior hangar. And when that airship went down with all of the biplanes on it, it broke apart into 2 separate sections, and each section was sort of 60 by 60 meters wide, well, diameter really. And so looking at that separate site, we had to map each 60 by 60 meter section, and it took ages and ages, but what we got out of the end of it was this very beautiful photomosaic map that I've never seen its equal in terms of aviation sites or other deep water sites. And it was highly, highly fascinating. We were able to match the construction photos to the way that the front of the airship had sort of settled on the seafloor, and it was very much like a balloon deflating. And then the back of the airship had basically turned over and accordioned straight into the seafloor and created this mound, and all of the biplanes had just popped up on top of it, and they were sitting there very pretty, and they had the wing structure still intact. They had the wing skin still intact. You could still see the Navy insignia on them. They were bright yellow with the naval blue insignia on the outsides and the stars in them. Beautiful, beautiful wreck site. Very big wreck site for me.
And those planes were remarkable Sparrowhawks that the pilots were called trapeze pilots because when they came back to land, they had to hook onto a trapeze. There was a hook up on top of the wings, and they would have to, if they were to fly next to the dirigible, they'd be in a vacuum and stall, so they had to come up on it, aim for the trapeze with their hook, stall it and hook, and then get hoisted up through a T-shaped aircraft hangar door in the bottom of the dirigible. It was just very gutsy flying.
Very much so. So the trapeze would be lowered out of the airship bottom, and they would come up, hook up on it, and then get brought up into the hangar, and the pilot would actually climb up out of the airplane and onto the strut system of the trapeze device in order to get out. It's brilliant. There's a video on YouTube. If anybody wants to look it up, just look up USS Macon on YouTube, and you'll see one of these planes doing the trapeze run. It's cool.
That sounds a little terrifying.
There's one of those planes in the Smithsonian. It's not totally original.
Correct. No, it is not. Well, it's made out of 2 original planes.
Yes, yes.
So,
yeah. F-9C Sparrowhawk. It's beautiful. Yep.
There's a funny story about that, actually. So the Sparrowhawk that's at Udvar-Hazy
Zooming in
is the red Sparrowhawk. Each of the different planes were painted with chevrons on their wings, bands behind the cockpit. Their cowlings were painted, and their wheel pants were painted in terms of squadron leader colors. So they had a red one, a yellow one, a blue one, a green one, and a black one, and a white one. The red one was the sort of most well-known, most photographed one. In the Smithsonian, they decided to create a replica sparrowhawk out of the remains of 2 of these sparrowhawks, one of which was documented to be the original red one. When we were down on the USS Macon site in 2015, when we were doing our photo mosaic, we ran directly over top of one of the biplanes on site, and because the level of preservation is so great, we were able to see the chevron in the wings as we went over it, and it was red. And so, because this is a case where when you're researching, if you don't research every single thing, and people have begun to write things that are based on one piece of research. So every piece of research in the past 50 years has cited that these biplanes were a specific way, and that all of the numbers corresponded to one specific color, and that was it. So when we ran over this biplane, we were going, oh my God, what is in the Smithsonian? What is going on? Mystery, drama, intrigue. But in reality, it was a case of faulty research and faulty reporting, and that actually the colors changed. They were actually repainting the planes to what was actually on the Macon. So they had 6 biplanes in total. 4 of them were actually on the USS Macon at any point, and they would repaint those planes as red, yellow, blue, and black anytime that they were going through a rotation. So it just so happened that there was a red, yellow, blue, and black, or sorry, a red, white, blue, and black on the Macon at the time that it went down. And there was also a red one and a white one still inside the hangar waiting to be used or being rotated out for maintenance or parts or something like that. And that's what the Smithsonian was able to have, of course, because it didn't go down with the USS Macon. But for about, you know, a week or so, I was convinced that I had some sort of scandalous story on my hands, and I was really super excited about it. But there is no such scandal. One in the Smithsonian is the original red one, and the one that was on the USS Macon was just repainted red because it was on the USS Macon.
Mm. Lonnie, how about you? What's your biggest physical size wreck?
Well, the biggest one I pinpointed, so it was a discovery only on paper, was the USS Lexington, which went down in the Battle of the Coral Sea in May 1942. And that was done by reconstructing the battle and pulling all the ship's logs of the ships that had been in the battle and figuring out their lats and longs, where they were at any one time and what had happened to the ships during the battle, including studying all the photos. So that work was completed, and then Paul Allen was able to go out with the Petrel and actually locate the ship. What was a big thrill for me was I asked, did they find the USS Lexington according to the coordinates that I had recorded, and the answer was yes. So that was great news.
So they just dove directly on it and found it.
Well, I don't know their methodology.
There's
they could have done what
there's
we're
actually
doing.
a documentary on that that's publicly available now.
Oh, that's great.
I think it's released by Vulcan Productions.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Seems like there should be some rocks on either side of Argus, but not really any in the view.
Right. I haven't seen anything that I wanted to mark in a while because I think that it's pretty much
Rocks.
very
Bridge
good,
nav.
very
Yeah.
rocks.
At the end of this line, that means we're 50%
We'll
of the way
proceed to
through?
the selected target and hold position there.
All right.
Excellent.
Thank you.
I'm going to mark end line for Nautilus.
Okay.
End line for the ship.
Yes.
Yeah.
Check 1, 2, 1, 2.
So Rennie, how long does each one of these transects roughly take us?
Sorry, I can't hear you too well. What was that?
So how long does each one of these transects roughly take us?
Seems like they're about a couple hours.
Couple hours each?
Are they
Depends on
equivalent length? Are they all the same length?
Yeah, I think so. Let me just double check. It depends on if we're making a knot or not.
Mm.
A knot or not.
A knot or not?
Knot
A knot or not?
Yeah, maybe 3 and a half. Well, let me see. Hold on. Yeah, 2 hours or more, depending on our speed.
Okay. So we've got about roughly 20
Maybe
plus
they were
hours
3
left.
3 hours, I'll say, just given what we've been. Plus the turn time, which is not insignificant.
Yeah, that's true.
So we're still about 300 meters apart for each line?
200.
200?
Looks, yeah, I was going to say it looks less than that.
So 30-ish hours ballpark until we finish the rest of our lines.
We have 3 more south, and then we have north a few.
A few?
I think 5.
Okay.
I hope when we do the north ones, we start at the southernmost
We will.
scan line. You know what I mean?
I believe we will.
And then
'Cause
work up.
that's where we left off.
Summer, does Argus have a top speed?
She's off SPL right now, but I can help with that a little. Maybe?
I mean, it kind of depends on how
Argus
quickly we're moving.
is towed only. It doesn't propel itself through
It
the
doesn't
water.
have any. Okay.
It has a front and a back thruster,
Okay.
but that's merely to spin at the end of the cable.
Okay.
If they both push in the same direction, it can move a little bit in one direction, but it can't get independently, decide where to go.
Yeah.
It's got all that cable. And its core function in dual vehicle operations is to decouple Hercules from the motion of the vessel at the surface.
Yeah.
So in ROV speak, as inelegant as it sounds, it's a clump weight. It's a highly functional clump weight that, all of our signals pass through, and it has lights and a beautiful camera and performs a lot of important functions. But at the end of the day, it's still a clump weight. Just don't tell Argus.
Argus, we love you. Doctor, what are your thoughts on the side scan sonar on the potential rocky rocks on the right side?
Brian, are
Yes.
you asking what?
What's your thoughts on the side scan sonar images on the right? Some more rocky rocks?
Rock.
Rock rocks.
Yeah, we saw that one approaching in the mesotech, and
Did you?
It looked rock-like.
Because of what we were seeing in the Argus screen was basically very singular rounded rocks, and that's what we had seen for a really long time until last watch. I was actually wondering how they could sort of make these weird shapes, just single rocks.
The speed, yeah.
And then last watch, I actually saw a really nicely rounded shaped boulder with what looked like a squatty, weird, melty boulder on top, and then that was on top of a weird ridge line. And so I was going, oh, okay, now I can see how we have these really weird rock shapes. But I had never seen something like that before. And then, yeah, with the stretch, it makes it look rectangular in some places, but it's not.
Shout out to our viewer from Finland.
All right.
Yeah. It's a global expedition.
Yeah.
Are you keeping track of the countries?
Maybe.
That would be fun.
Thanks for joining us.
Uksi, kaksi, kolme, neljä, viisi.
I should have known you knew how to say it, though. Should have known.
Just counting, counting.
I spent some time in Norway, actually, for a period of about 2 years, working on the Norwegian Air Force Museum, the Norsk Luftfartsmuseum, and doing an exhibit in there about the development of civil aviation history in Norway, which is fascinating, but was able to get all of the Norwegian seasons up north, way north, and summers where it didn't get dark, and winters where it didn't get light, and all kinds of things. It was really interesting. I really came to appreciate and love Scandinavian
When was that?
areas and cultures. 2016, 17.
Nice. So you lived there for 2 years?
Didn't really live there, no, but I was there for the better part of most of the months.
Would you go back?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I thought it was really cool. Just I really got an appreciation for the culture. That area is very, very northern, so it's not as international as Oslo. And it was just a really, really neat area. And I think because we were actually studying the culture and how aviation affected culture as well, and getting all of the vintage stories, I think I came to appreciate it a little bit more about how people were developing. And the Norwegians have such a sort of culture of exploration, and especially going back to Amundsen and some of the early Arctic explorers, either by ships and aircraft. The race to the North Pole, the race to the South Pole.
Thor Heyerdahl going on the raft on the
Oh,
Kon-Tiki.
right,
and
right.
his exploration of the Pacific.
Right. So I think the Norwegian culture is just really kind of cool.
Nice.
And the countryside is so majestic.
Yes.
The fjords and the mountains.
And you can find some really great looking underwater aircraft in Norway, in the fjords of Norway. The preservation level is absolutely fantastic. They have some examples in museums up there. The Sola Museum down in Norway, they have oh gosh, what is it? It's a German aircraft that they brought up. Looks fantastic. All they're doing is putting a little lanolin on it and taking it through conservation treatment. It's great.
What makes that area so hospitable for wrecks?
It's basically, it's cold, and the salt content is just ever so slightly less. So it's very cold, very dark, and that aids in preservation a ton.
Got a couple of questions coming in about what we hopefully expect to see. And to answer that first one about whether we expect to see a fairly intact plane or debris field, we honestly don't 100% know. We know that there was, shortly after making that emergency landing, there was smoke and some type of ignition of an explosion.
Yes.
Do you want me to get this one?
Yeah, it's up to you. Whatever you think.
I think it's a rock, but it's just all out here by its lonesome.
Sure.
No, I say we skip it.
Skip it.
Yep. Sorry, Brian.
That's fine. So with that eyewitness account saying that there is a explosion, some of the materials that were recovered by the Avocet seemed to have some exposure to gas as well as flame. And the wing span, which is about 118 feet 2 inches, was said to have rested on the water floating for roughly 5 minutes or so before sinking. However, we don't know, since the top of the plane was the wing, whether it was still kind of intact and just the bottom had blown out, or whether it had been blown into front and rear section. We won't know until we find it. And the question about animals encrusting the metal parts, Dr. Megan had done an excellent job explaining that we don't actually expect to see much of that, if any at all, because of the depth, and hoping to, if and when we find the wreck, find it hopefully remarkably well preserved.
That's correct.
Thank you, Bridge.
And Dr. Megan, I know you've talked about this before, but could you discuss a little bit how the ship might have, or the boat plane might have sank as well?
We've really got three sort of scenarios here, and one of them is that it was a minor explosion that blew out a midsection of the aircraft, and essentially the cockpit and the tail section and the wings would still be together but somewhat mangled. We have another supposition that maybe if the explosion was a little bit bigger, it actually separated either one or both of the cockpit and the tail, and maybe one or the other were still attached to the wing. And then, you know, our third case scenario is that the wing, the cockpit, and the tail were separated and that each lie independently on the seafloor. But we think that we are going to be able to see the wing section the easiest, just because we know from the eyewitness account that it was still intact as it began to sink. There's nothing that could have been so strong as to break that apart once it was in the water column. It's a very strong structure, and the engines on that would have allowed it to sink very quickly. So that would be a very bright, rectangular, obvious return on a sonar that we're hoping to see. And in the event that we see that, then we suppose that the rest of the aircraft, even if we don't necessarily pick it out by first sight on the sonar, we would be able to note that it was in the area, and then tighten our search, switch our frequency around maybe, and get a better image of things that are nearby to that wing section. That's
Thank you
the
very
plan.
much. All right.
Keep sending in those questions. Thanks for interacting with us and watching along with us as we continue this exploration. It's been 5 years in the making, correct, Lonnie?
Yes, May 2014 we started the project. And there's great pride in Connecticut for aviation. And this Sikorsky was based in Bridgeport, Connecticut, or this aircraft was produced there. And Pratt & Whitney supplied the 4 Hornet engines, and the Hamilton Standard the 4 3-bladed props. They were variable pitch propellers, constant speed propellers, all in Connecticut, all close by. Manufacturing facilities were all interrelated. So great pride in Connecticut for aviation development of aircraft, especially during World War II.
Variable pitch as in the propellers are able to change their rotation?
Yes, and keep a constant speed. Yes.
Gotcha.
Shout out to our 2 Chinese viewers. Thanks for joining us.
Sikorsky actually had a competitor in Connecticut, in Bloomfield, Connecticut, Kaman Aircraft, and Charles Kaman invented the counter-rotating blades for the propeller.
Oh.
So he did the Navy SH-2 lamps helicopters. And when he lost his naval contract for one period, he realized that the propeller wood had a resonance that was good for use in guitars, so he invented the Ovation guitar. So in his office in Bloomfield, Connecticut, he had a lineup of guitars, and all the big musicians would come and jam with him.
That's where Ovation guitars got started?
Yeah.
Wow.
At Kaman Aircraft.
Interesting.
To use the wood that they had already purchased, but they lost the contract.
Wow.
And then, of course, they got a contract back, but he was very innovative, and also started Fidelco Seeing Eye Dogs.
Huh.
That's quite a range of
Yeah.
Products. Branching out.
Props to the guitars, the scene, and eye dogs.
Yeah, but he tried to stay in business with Sikorsky.
Huh.
So still thriving today. Kaman Aircraft Corporation.
Hello to our Connecticut viewer. Thanks for hanging out.
Peyton, do you see that little fishy fish?
Thanks for pointing that out.
Fishy, fishy.
Well, I thought you were maybe getting bored over there with no fish and no biology.
Where's
to
the
look at. Where's the
biology?
biology? Peyton has already outed me in his comics for saying bio-clutter.
You did say it right on. You did say it live on stream.
Well, I've done it before. It's very interesting, very excellent drawing and watercolor work that he's
thank
doing,
you.
and so it's hard not to notice.
So, Dr. Megan, we have a question coming in about how you and the rest of the science team might prioritize some of those dive sites when it after everything gets cleaned up.
So, and yeah, that's the key term. After everything gets cleaned up, it will look different than how we remember seeing it. So we will have to just set a fresh eyes over the targets and see what they look like in terms of what we know what we're looking for. So I was talking to my husband Tim about this earlier, and he was saying how he thought one of the targets looked really good, and I was saying how to me it looked like it was too tall and too rectangular, almost like if I was imagining if it was a container that got off of a ship somehow, it's not the same shape as what we're looking at, even though it might possibly be man-made. And that to me puts it a lower priority, even though it looks kind of cool, if it's far too tall or far too big or just not the same shape that we're looking for. That would make it a lower priority in my mind. But, you know, we might take a look at these and just see that nothing actually looks good except for something that looks man-made but might not be sort of the right thing that we're looking for, and so we might go see that anyways. So it really all depends on what they all look like as a collective group and what we all think about them. There are two archaeologists here that are far more experienced in sonar than I am, and so I'll defer to their input, and we'll all talk about them and then just sort of make a priority list from there.
Do you ever find that maybe going from one watch to another or coming back to it and then taking a look at it again after having a bit of time for it to sink in and looking at it a fresh set of eyes is helpful?
Well, I know
That makes a difference?
it makes a difference the longer that we stay on, the more experience we have in this particular environment with this particular equipment. Basically all of the targets that we started mapping in our first couple lines, I am sort of, you know, poo-pooing,
I don't know if you
thumbs
see
down
what
on.
I'm looking at in the mezzo here, but there's some linear things.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll start to see those soon.
Oh, okay, great, thank you.